Bien, nous voilà avec la première.
Here we are. This is the first roundtable. We couldn't take any questions in the room because, unfortunately, Jean Pisani-Ferry had to leave to catch a train to Brussels. Now, from now on, as you'll see a QR code appear at the screen after each talk. This will enable you to ask questions, and we'll be distributing the questions between speakers to answer the question. Climate, Christian Goulet asked a question to Jean Pisani-Ferry, the director of TSC. Who likes to think, he likes to joke. He has a dual personality. I read this puzzling sentence in this contribution, but he's the one who, not to try to evade despair, decided that we should take stock of what we have achieved since the beginning of this century. So thanks for this beautiful, this great idea, which we're going to discuss with Laurence Tubania, sitting on my right. She is the manager, director of the European Foundation for Climate, but especially she's been the main architect of the Paris Agreement. Next to her, Yann Leriche, Director General of Leriche, Yves Leriche. Then I have someone from BNP Paribas, and I hope that Sylvain Chabé-Ferret is with us online. He's been waiting for us. He's in Berlin. He wasn't free to come all the way to Paris. So I would like to see Sylvain, who is beaming, literally beaming. He was supposed to start the debate. Are you with us, Sylvain? Okay, here you are. Thank you for being with us. Hello, Sylvain. So, Sylvain, I suppose that you've been listening to Jean Pisani-Ferry. Being an economist at the TSC, you are supposed to introduce this roundtable. This morning, you're supposed to start on the optimistic note. I've read with the progress of human genius. So we need some reassurance today and tomorrow. Sylvain, you have the floor. Thank you for being with us. Yes, bonjour Vincent. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I'm sorry I can't be with us in a conference on what can be done and what could possibly work to help us control climate change. So this is one of the questions we are asking ourselves. I've listened carefully to Jean Pisani-Ferry. What he said was fascinating. I know that in general, economists tend to be a bit lugubrious and pessimistic. I want to strike a positive note, an optimistic, and tell you that things are working. Some things can work and are working. What I'm seeing, and this came as a surprise, it couldn't be expected 20 or 30 years ago when it all started. The first thing which we needed to realize is that we needed to pay tribute to climate experts, those that sounded the alarm in the early 80s, and even in the late 70s, who started thinking about the problem. They've been very tenacious. They've done a lot of modeling, and this really sounded the alarm and knew that we had to focus on the issue. And I'd like to congratulate them for the quality of their forecasts, which are being validated. It's a major source of inspiration when you are a scientist. We're kind of jealous of the quality of the forecasting that Climate Religion was able to give us. So we'd like to be able to provide them with economic forecasts of the same quality. So the quality of science is amazing. Second thing that came is very unexpectedly the kind of a technological miracle that we've achieved during the past 20 years, in particular the fantastic progress made in the generation of renewable energies, the solar panels, the cost of those has gone down dramatically. This couldn't be expected when we all started. The International Agency for Energy was really amazed. So that the price it would remain about stable, and it kept going down year after year, which really facts are obvious, tell us a lot. Renewable energies and solar companies are becoming competitive, and this is really incredible, which is very useful, very helpful, of course, since we continue to fight climate change. So this is really astounding progress, two types of progress, thanks to scientists for the past 40 years. Progress made on batteries, storage capacity, and declining cost or price of batteries. You can really imagine, and this is reasonable, to switch the whole of the transport industry, so which could not be imagined 30 years ago. And current batteries make it possible to store all types of energy, because intermittence is a problem. They can be used, renewable energies, on a much wider scale. So these progresses are outstanding, remarkable. And this is why I'm sounding a positive note. And the last, still on progress, and Jean briefly referred to this, it's on public interventions. Part of the progress I've just been listing, in particular progress made on solar panels, was partly due to the role played by the public sector, lowering the price on energy. It provides subsidies to these energies and taxation on fossil fuel. And the European Union, of course, has been the world leader of a public intervention on climate. So all of us must be proud of these achievements, even though we have an impression that European citizens these days find it difficult to recognize progress and to be proud of what they've done. We must recognize that it's right. Of course, and the US, of course, is taking new initiatives. This started with the IRA that Jean mentioned as well. So these are the main three avenues for progress. And this is why I think it's we can send a positive note, both on private level and public level. Thank you very much, even though we still have a long way to go. Thank you, Sylvain. For striking this positive note. Laurence Tubania, whom, as I said earlier, has done so much in 2015 to achieve the Paris Agreement. Has it changed much? Do you share the optimism that Sylvain has just expressed? Yes, there is a new momentum. There's a before the Paris Agreement and what happened after the Paris Agreement. Of course, I'm still very positive to the Paris Agreement, but the international signals that Jean Pisani-Ferret referred earlier are extremely significant when it comes to the way they are interpreted. Something I'd like to highlight, I'm working on the history of climate negotiation in 19 with the first public manifestation with many heads of states in Copenhagen was interpreted as a failure. people would responsibility for this so-called failure on China. And it's very interesting to see that in China, when the then Prime Minister went back or came back to Peking, he said Copenhagen is a major success, that the green revolution has started. In Europe and USA, their interpretation on this was totally wrong. It was the start of a huge program in favor of green batteries. So the change, of course, was by the Chinese industry started. So the way in which the signal was to be interpreted was very important. As to the Paris Agreement, indeed, an agreement between parties can't do it all because there's no such thing as a global government, as you well know. The Paris Agreement, as you know, it was really a 360 degrees diplomacy with the private companies, public authorities, public organizations, local authorities. All this was taken by the Paris Agreement because we knew that we would be able to anticipate in terms of course, I am an economist. If you change the anticipation expectations, by so doing, you change behaviors. What happened in China, this is what happened after the Paris Agreement, a change of course. And immediately afterwards, you see a number of initiatives taken by financial institutions. It took a long time for the World Bank. It's just occurring now. The insurance industry and companies try to interpret a kind of unclear paragraph, net zero emissions by 2050. That's the interpretation of the Paris Group, that accelerated this trend. And thanks to the huge pressure of China with 10 years, or 5 years rather, of putting their act together and realize that the transition has started. Do we want to be part of it or not? And this is what Jean was alluded to: transport, batteries, energy, as well as because China, by the time, has started a reforestation program to capture carbon. There was too much carbon around at that time. Now, I realize that Paris has become, Paris Agreement has become the landmark where the carbonation plans of the various industries that are also sweeping the problem under the carpet, trying to get rid of carbon and stop emitting in order to be okay. This is, we realize that it's not totally valid. And then a huge effort at regulating at European level. And we see the result of this. I was in Poland recently. The switch to renewable energy in Poland, and that includes coal-based industries, is a combination between the EPS, price of carbon, and social pressure concerning air pollution, but also being aligned with the Paris Agreement. Something happened there that transformed behaviors, but don't forget that this is a huge boat. You know, been using working in fossil fuels 2 centuries ago, and the agreement came at the very end. Getlink used to be a Eurotunnel, and the Channel Tunnel is 20 years old. So this is. Did you see things happen for this wonderful instrument in terms of decline? It contributed to the lowering of carbon emissions. Yes, 30 years today, Channel Tunnel. In fact, it wasn't built to decarbonate the transport, even though it's a main tool for that. The Channel Tunnel is an electric tunnel that to transport 1/4 of the freight between Europe and the UK every single year. For 30 years, it's been transporting about 500 million passengers. 30 years, things have changed at different stages for that. What we know for sure is that the tunnel, indeed, wasn't built to lower carbon emissions, but we realized that this was getting greener. But it was a passive realization to begin with. Climatologists, climate experts told us that there was a problem with the greenhouse gases effect, and something had to be done. And that's when Eurotunnel started wondering about their own emissions. And very early on, that was in 2007, I think there were very few companies back then who realized that emissions were low, which was a good thing, and climate change would have no impact on the company. And then it's only later on that we realized that being green was not enough. We had to do more. We knew we had an advantage because we're already green, and we should push even further to push down the carbon emissions level. And that's when the Paris Agreement triggered this new awareness with a corporate action, corporate determination. For instance, 2 years ago, we laid an electric cable in the tunnel to promote the exchanges of carbon-free, zero carbon, zero emissions. Now we're starting streamlining transport fast trains between London and the continent. Now, there were a number of obstacles on the way because as we collected more information, we ended up realizing that some questions were without any answer. Why is it? We know that we are green, but the extra financial rating agency told us, okay, you are green, but not that green at the end of the day. And we understood by then it's because they value, they measure, they look at the progress we've made over time. Yann will be coming back on this later on because it's one of the major contributions of the TSE, I mean, the capacity to calculate. But that will be a bit later. Now, I'd like to know what ask the last speaker on my left, Antoine Sire, the director of commitment at Paribas, who have been in this position for 7 years. Maybe you had a feeling that you've done your share, because during that time, the bank, BNP Paribas, which is, financial sector, is often attacked. We're not sure as to what they do to promote green energy. You've seen this shift between the financing of fossil energy and green energy. You've seen this change.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Well, major changes have taken place. It's quite essential, as stated by Mr. Leriche. It's crucial to know where things get started. At BNP Paribas is the first European bank set up 200 years ago to support the French Revolution. And there was a merger giving birth to BNP, founded in 1966. According to a decree by Michel Debré, it was supposed to support the 30 heydays, and BNP is now dedicated to supporting the transformation of European industry. And I must say that we are the first bank dealing with energy issues and fossil fuels, amongst others, let's say, since we're mainly dealing with them at the moment. And due to the fact that we're fully aware of public policies of the transformation issues, various pressures in the last years, we have gradually redesigned our approach and our funding portfolio includes, when it comes to energy, includes what is to replace the funding of fossil fuels by low-carbon types of energy. And out of the 50 billion euros, we had 80% fossil fuels in the past and 10% of low-carbon energy. And now, or rather in 2030, it will be exactly the contrary. 10% residual fossil fuels, and the rest will be low-carbon sources. And we are at a kind of turning point, since we have already reached 65% of low-carbon sources. And I'm talking here about the whole lot of loans. That's part of the loan fleet or loan base, let's say. Thanks very much for bringing up this point and clarifying it. Now, I think it might be interesting to have the participants' views. Laurence, Tubania, at the end of your introduction, you said that we could have done more and more quickly in this respect. Didn't you? Yes, indeed. In 2015, it was time to discuss the part to be played by the various sources of energy in the agreement, and we couldn't reach any agreement, to be quite accurate, let's face it. Now we know that we have to be much more specific, even if renewables are progressing. We are kind of adding more and more fossil fuels instead of reducing them. And I think that's why we have to shift the trend and be more specific in terms of technologies and make a clear-cut choice between carbonated and decarbonated sources of energy. It's not easy, it's not simple, it's a major issue these days, major challenge. And we are in the midst of discussions when fossil fuel or energy producers say we're going to find the good solution. And in today's world, especially in light of the current Ukrainian war, we are just wondering whether we will reach the point I've just mentioned. Well, in a minute, we will discuss all this with Mrs. Patrier and Mr. Pellion. You talking in terms of a timeline, you said that we may have made mistakes in terms of number of tons produced by companies, and you say that, but that this approach may be unfit and maybe too maybe a little bit too insufficient. So what did we observe? When looking out emissions, we realized that all the rating entities are American, I'm saying between inverted commas, and they do measure emissions vis-à-vis a reference landmark year. If you are already very good, you'll be less well rated than a company starting from a lower level. It's a bit weird, but this is it. And so we just wondered whether we were doing well, not so well, because we were working in some specific ecosystems. And I remember the time we got in touch with Mr. Grolier, we had exchanges with him to see if we were doing well, we were going the right direction. And he really supported us. We did create a chair to study this issue. And in light of the very poor and slow evolution of the rating companies, and in light of what's going on with some means of transport, such as ferries, for instance, which do emit a lot of GHG, etc. And in light, too, of the measurement methods, and since European companies are requested to disclose more and more financial details, although there is very little link between this obligation and the fact that we have to better and more decarbonate. Well, in light of all this, we are in such a situation that it's not easy to have a clear indicator concerning emissions. And but we work on templates to be ready to pay if needed in the future, and if wanted, we try to avoid running along a wrong track. But there is a long way to go. So, Sylvain was kind of optimistic, but didn't forget matters of concern, such as the price of carbon, first and foremost, because of the market, which is in a poor predicament in the downturn, and because of the social cost. Well, I mentioned all the uncertainties and what we don't know. We don't know about the cost of climate. What about the various political options in order to mainly fund what is working well? Well, in economic sciences, there are some various types of uncertainties. The social cost of carbon is one of these uncertainties. What about the price of 1 ton being released in the atmosphere? With what type of damage is going to be generated by this carbon? Of course, there have been estimates averaging 10 euros. Concerning the social cost, but the levels are now higher up, 100 euros. And a few weeks ago, a paper was released and stating an estimated social cost averaging $3,000 per ton. This means, all in all, that the climate action and the related emergency of undertaking actions may differ and will differ if the cost is a few tens, a few hundreds, or a few thousands. And there is also another degree of uncertainty due to the social cost of carbon. It's really worrying, but more and more people do work on it, which is rather positive. And we must take this point on board, this issue on board. Sorry, Sylvain, to interrupt you. Now, still dealing with the social cost, could you say what about the price as indicated on the carbon market, where the social cost of carbon is a tool used by the political decision maker to value the carbon cost concerning climate? No, Christian and some other colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, but the cost on the European market averages 80, 90 euros per ton. It's rather consistent with the estimates averaging 100 euros, but it's insufficient when these estimates state a much, much higher cost. Antoine, I was rather surprised when Mr. Ferret said that green investments were not less profitable than grey investments. I think that green was more expensive than decarbonated energies. The mic is on, don't worry. So when looking at things as a bank lender, you have a different view. When you lend money, you want to be refunded over the loan period, and otherwise it may be a big disaster if the last 2-3 years of the loan are not refunded. It may cancel the whole loan benefit, let's say. In a nutshell. So what is of interest to us is what's going to take place in the long term, in the long run, and especially when dedicated to lending money, to money lending. In the short term, I would say there are quite a lot of uncertainties, especially when it comes to the funding of renewables, and when the stakeholders get committed, are ready to go for renewables. There are still some psychological uncertainties, political uncertainties, projects. It takes a long time for a project to take up, so to speak, and to take off. Sorry, and. Anyway, you remember that at the latest conference on climate meeting, the motto was to take up the new challenge. That is, and we must all be aware of the new challenge. There are no alternatives, and this is what we have to do, and I hope we will be able to do it. So quite obviously, the more aware people become, when I say the more aware people, I mean the populations and the state authorities become in terms of the renewables, the better it will become for us to fund the related projects. So, going back to the cost of green investments, when interest rates were very high, as already mentioned, with even some negative marginal costs, we have a real issue in terms of model. And this had a detrimental impact when it came to develop aeolian sources of energy, wind sources of energies. And when looking at large-size companies such as Total, etc., no problem in terms of funding. But it's different for mid-sized companies or small-sized companies. And in 2022, even more, actually in 2023, 200 billion euros were used to fund the renewables. And this is the amount requested. Now, let me turn to the electricity power market, which is not at all an incentive for people to turn to renewables. So it's a set of reasons accounting for explaining the fact that things are not yet what they should be, and should be a major change in terms of sources of energy funding. Well, the socioeconomic cost of decarbonation is not yet clear, but there is a real effort to make to be under 2 degrees. And when investing in the long term, buying train engines, we have to make the choice now, not for 2040 or 2040, sorry, 2050. We have to make choices which can really yield positive results right now. And call for action is good, but there should be some level of visibility, which is not always the case. And for some time, taxation of biofuels in the railways industry have been higher than for road transport, and this is not working, of course. So when you use these sources of energy for trains, it's going to cost more. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Next, the cost of capital versus the green shift is a real issue. Will you have cheap funding sources if you are going green? This is a real issue to be solved. And my opinion is that the financial world has not made the right choices, and the models developed 50 or 60 years ago and haven't been positive, and despite the extensive academic work on these problems, we haven't reached the right point. When investing green, you can get if investing green, can you get lower interest rates? Well, I would say that mechanisms are much more sophisticated for debts than for capital cost. If you have got a green project, the cost won't be lower. It even will be higher than for a non-green project. And banks, BNP Paribas amongst others, have been pioneers in offering loans which make it possible for borrowers to have a lower rate of interest in the course of time. These measures have been looked into very thoroughly. What about the advantage, by the way, for the bank? Some Anglo-Saxon told us when we decided on this, some Anglo-Saxon people said, It's incredible when people want to start decarbonating. You grant them lower rates, and you reward them for doing it, and you lose money. It's a bit strange. It's weird, and we did say no. It's not weird, because we think that when a loan is granted in the long term, if it's for a green project, we think that sustainability of the company borrowing money will be better and greater than what would be the case for other companies. Now, you also should know that if you want to change your boiler, there are specific loans, valuable loans with some support. Now, are there any questions in the hall? I think there is a question, yes, to Mrs. Tubania. And what about the part of collective and personal awareness, increased awareness concerning this topic? Answer. Let me explain. 70% of European citizens, it's the same in France, are very, very concerned about climate change. Most of the time, they are halfway between choices they have to make and the opportunities to be able to make this choice. It all depends, for instance, on the place where you're living, because if you have no other means of transport than cars to go to work, when you live in a remote area, you just drive your car, and you can't do it differently because going electric when it comes to car buying is far too expensive. Now, when working together with Mr. Pech on this Convention for Climate, we realized that there were not many solutions, only depending on personal choices, on individual choices. We have 20-25% choice, and the remaining 80% are a bit, you are kind of a bit trapped. And there is a kind of disconnection, as I would say. It's quite well known in psychological behavior, and it gets too difficult for people. It gets too intricate, you know, and I can't do anything, so I don't want to know. And it's well rooted in people's minds. Some people have offered cheap leasing on e-cars, so much so that there was not enough money to fund it. So, I mean, I'm not at all saying that citizens' will is too low. I'm rather thinking of the level of consistency between public entities, and opportunities for choice. And there is a difference, for instance, in Scandinavian countries, isn't there? I heard or I read that you did something in Great Britain, so perhaps you could start dealing with France. Do you feel like touring the various political parties to remind them of opportunities and obligations? So I forget about. I'm neutral. So let me tell you that this issue shouldn't create problems. But this hasn't been the case, for instance, in Germany. And well, I must say that all in all, most political parties lack education in this area. We have realized this. We had the opportunity to speak at the French Assembly. There were very few participants listening to us. Journalists came round, so it was a bit more crowded. So in a nutshell, it's very difficult. It's still very difficult. There is a long way to go. Political authorities do not clearly understand how to anchor decisions locally, for instance, and that's specifically the case for wind power and wind power development. But we are not going to mention this right now. Thanks very much to all the speakers of this roundtable session, and we are going to turn to other experts who are going to discuss fossil fuels.